Midterms are finally over, and our protagonist Ian Perkus couldn't be happier. He survived another round in the brutal academy. But while he celebrates with his friends, Seline Haster reminds him that the battle isn't over yet. One wrong step, and he could still be expelled. Leto Einstern, ever the realist, jokes that Ian's future might just be that of a low-ranking city guard. But Ian doesn't care. He made it through with his footwork and horse-riding skills, even if his swordsmanship is lacking. The night of celebration ends, and Ian stumbles back to his room, swearing never to take a morning class again. But as soon as he falls into a deep sleep, a chilling vision haunts him. An ominous voice whispers, "Delphirum is coming. He must be stopped." Jolted awake in a cold sweat, Ian brushes it off as a drunken nightmare. But when he notices an unfamiliar letter on his desk, things take an even stranger turn. The letter, written in elegant handwriting by Cephia, speaks of fiancés, hunting festivals, demonic beasts, and a dream shared across time. The date? A completely different year, one that doesn't even exist. At the end of the letter, if they don't protect the future, the world will end. Ian dismisses it as a ridiculous prank, crushing the paper in frustration. But as he rushes off to class, one unsettling thought lingers. Who would go through the trouble of writing him a love letter? A moment later, in the academy, he was walking quietly when he heard students around him whispering, warning each other not to lock eyes with him. They said he would try to talk to them and ask if he was the crazy one, the one from the rumors. He felt like everyone was staring at him and wondered why he had an axe at his waist. The realization made him feel awkward, and he questioned what the hell was going on. He then saw Leto and Seline and called out to them, which shocked both of them. However, they quickly turned around and acted as if they didn't see him. Leto whispered to Seline to ignore him and pretend she didn't know him. She agreed, adding that she didn't want to be dragged off to a strange place again. But then, he shouted at them, asking if they were even listening to him. Leto was surprised upon hearing his words but suddenly noticed something. He began to stare at him, scanning him closely, and muttered that something about him was different from yesterday. Frustrated, he shouted at Leto that he wasn't in the mood for that bullshit. But before he could finish his sentence, Leto rushed forward and hugged him with tears in his eyes. Leto shouted that the evil spirit that had possessed him had finally disappeared. He pushed Leto away, telling him to stop being disgusting and demanding an explanation. Leto replied that something strange had possessed him for the past week. Shocked, he asked Leto if he had really said a whole week, and told them the last thing he remembered was saying goodbye to them last night. Seline, now furious, asked if he truly didn't remember anything and reminded him that he had been treating them like servants for an entire week, ruining their reputation. Leto then told him that they would have taken him to an exorcist if he hadn't threatened them with an axe. He grabbed the axe at his waist and asked if that was what they meant. Seline quickly asked him to keep it away from them, saying she was getting traumatic flashbacks. Confused by everything he had just heard, he began to wonder if he had really been possessed by an evil spirit. But as far as he could recall, he hadn't been near any dangerous places or objects. That made him question whether it had anything to do with the nightmare he had. Leto then told him he was glad the spirit had disappeared, and Seline added that she was thankful it was gone before another incident happened. Stuttering, he asked them what they meant by incident, and whether he had done something. Seline responded that he had done something really crazy. He had beaten the second year's top student. Upon hearing second year top student, he immediately thought of the youngest aura expert, the one referred to as a monster swordswoman among the second years, Seria Ordina. Stammering, he asked if they were really saying that he had beaten a monster like her, and if they were messing with him. But Seline simply asked why he was acting so surprised and reminded him that he had hospitalized her for an entire week. Shocked, he shouted that there was no way that had happened, and asked what kind of evil spirit could have possessed him to make that possible. But Seline simply told him that they didn't know, and asked what he planned to do about it. Confused, he asked what she meant, and she clarified that she was talking about swordsmanship class today. She then asked if he remembered that he was facing Seria again today, shocking him even more. A week ago, Seria Ordina was down on the stage, crawling to grab her sword. She tried to stand up, muttering that it was unbelievable. She told him that before, he could never last more than 10 seconds against her, yet he had easily defeated her this time. However, Ian simply responded that what was truly unbelievable was her mediocre swordsmanship. He then slashed her in the face with his wooden sword, causing her to be thrown backward and slam onto the floor again. She tried to stand up once more, but before she could go any further, he slashed her from behind. The students watching murmured among themselves, questioning whether Seria hadn't been virtually undefeated, even against fourth-year students. They were shocked that Ian had won against someone like her. Ian then approached Seria and asked if she wasn't even a little suspicious. He told her that she had taken the bait at every small opening he had shown, without realizing that it was all a trap. Raising his wooden sword, he finished the fight with ease. Back to the present, Ian asked himself why, out of everyone, he had to fight someone in the same class as him. He thought that it would have been fine if he was up against someone he could actually beat, but instead, he was fighting the Academy's so-called unbeatable student, Seria Ordina. Seline shouted at him, telling him to call it quits while he still could and just surrender. Meanwhile, the other students whispered about how persistent Seria was. They remarked that she had lost miserably, yet she still wouldn't accept it. Seria heard the students whispering that the professor had always covered for her because she was strong, but now, they bet it had bruised her pride. Some even admitted that they would have felt ashamed in her position. The professor then shouted for everyone to be quiet and announced that the match was about to begin. He reminded them that the match would serve as a substitute for their class, meaning the outcome would be reflected in their grades. Ian cursed the evil spirit that had possessed him, complaining that it should have at least cleaned up its mess before disappearing. Instead, it had simply vanished after doing whatever it wanted, leaving him to deal with the aftermath. Now, he was left wondering what the hell he was supposed to do. He knew that Seria was the top student, so losing a few marks wouldn't hurt her. But if he failed this class, he would end up as a NEET living with his parents. Taking a deep breath, he calmed himself down, thinking that if he could just hold out until Seria was satisfied, 10 minutes should be enough. However, he was immediately shocked when she was instantly in front of him. In the next second, she slashed him, sending him flying and slamming him onto the floor. Within an instant, he realized that there wasn't a snowball's chance in hell he would last 10 minutes. He'd be in the hospital within 1 minute at this rate. Still, he knew that if he gave up now, Seria would never accept it. That meant he had to hold out a little longer. Determined, he stood up and asked if it was his turn now. Seria simply told him to do as he wished. Without hesitation, he dashed forward, jumped, and swung his sword in her direction. He was surprised when he felt his body moving with unnatural ease. It felt incredibly light, making him wonder what in the world had happened during the time he couldn't remember. His body was responding exactly as he wanted it to. As his slash neared Seria, she simply smiled, then disappeared in an instant. Reappearing at his side, she effortlessly disarmed him, knocking his sword from his hands. The next moment, she slashed him from the front, sending him crashing onto the floor once again. For a brief moment, he thought there had to be a way out of this. But then, he realized it was impossible. Seria stared down at him and asked if he hadn't shown her that opening on purpose. She then reminded him that just last week, he had brushed her aside so effortlessly as if he were toying with her. He angrily shouted at her to stop talking about last week already, saying he would lose his mind if he heard it one more time. She, however, furiously demanded to know whose fault he thought it was that she had ended up as a laughingstock. Without hesitation, she jumped at him, ready to strike down. He immediately raised his sword, confirming that both his kinetic vision and reaction speed had improved. However, it was a trap. She easily turned around and managed to slash him, sending him flying and slamming him into the stage corner. He saw her attacking, first from the side, then from below, and next from the front. But he knew that what it looked like was not the full picture. It was actually a continuous assault, and though it was a struggle, he was keeping up. He wondered why she was making so many unnecessary moves. She quoted what he said to her last week not to charge in just because he saw an opening. She added that assumed it was a trap, reminding him that he was the one who had told her that last week, and explained that it was the reason she had asked for a rematch in the first place. Meanwhile, he was exhaustedly catching his breath. She then ran toward him, shouting if it wasn't about time he got serious. He suddenly understood that while his strength had certainly grown, Seria wasn't the same as last time either. Thanks to the words he had said to her last week, she was making more unnecessary movements in an attempt to prove herself. Seria dodged his slash and blocked his next attack. He managed to block her attacks as well as she pushed forward. He thought to himself that he had fought her equally for long enough now, so if he called it quits at this point, Seria wouldn't be able to say anything. She raised her sword and stated that now that he had finally gotten serious, it was time for her to show him what she could do too. He saw her attack coming closer and didn't move from his place, purposely taking the hit and slamming onto the floor. The professor then announced that if Ian didn't give up within 5 seconds, Seria would win. Lying on the floor, he thought to himself that both the possession and this duel with the top student had been the most unbelievable things to ever happen in his life. As the professor began to count down, Ian told himself that he had done what he needed to do to make amends and that it was time to become a normal person again. But then Seria spoke, asking if she was right in thinking that he had taken that hit on purpose just now. She told him not to think he could settle things like that, which shocked him. She then added that if he ended the fight like this, she would request another duel. Even if he refused, skipped class, or tried to avoid her, she would challenge him again and again until he had tasted the same humiliation she had felt. He grabbed his sword and stood up in anger, thinking about how he was struggling like hell right now over something he didn't even remember doing. He then wondered if Seria was seriously treating him like her archenemy just because he had messed with her for a single week. The professor told him that if he wanted to withdraw, now was his chance, then asked if he wanted to stop. Ian replied that he could still go on. The professor agreed and announced that the duel would continue. Seria praised him for standing up again and stated that they couldn't just let things end like that. He smiled, knowing that there was no running away now, and swore to himself that he was going to tear that stubborn pride of hers to pieces again today. He knew that during their last exchange, he had clearly seen the movements of her sword and had been able to dodge without any difficulty. This made him realize that all he had to do was focus. Glaring at her, he swore to completely destroy her pride. As she ran toward him to attack, he simply watched her sword, surprised to find that he could clearly see its trajectory and the timing of her swings. She then leaped into the air, launching a powerful strike at him. But just as her sword was about to hit, he grabbed it with his bare hand, shocking her. His golden eyes burned with intensity as he glared at her and told her that he had caught her. With ease, he threw her sword aside, making her stumble and drop to her knees. Raising his own sword, he declared that the match was over, leaving her in disbelief. She instinctively covered her head, trembling in fear, which stopped him in his tracks. He hesitated, questioning whether this was really the right way to end things. Was it even necessary to settle something from a week ago? He knew that this wouldn't truly resolve anything. Rather, the same situation would just repeat itself. With that realization, he stepped toward her, understanding that this was not about winning, but about addressing the real issue at hand. Instead of attacking, he flicked her forehead. She let out a sharp yelp of pain, and the entire crowd gasped in shock. Seria demanded to know what the hell he was doing and if he was mocking her now that he had won. But instead of answering, he simply asked why she was trying so hard to win against him. Clenching her teeth in frustration, she shouted that winning was everything to her. If she lost, she would become a laughingstock. He smiled calmly and asked if other people's opinions were really that important. Then, he told her that losing one match wouldn't change what people thought of her that much. No matter what they said, the effort she had poured into honing her swordsmanship wouldn't just disappear because of a single defeat. She stammered in response, reluctantly agreeing with him, though she still seemed hesitant. He continued, acknowledging that being mocked hurt, but if everything she had worked for suddenly became meaningless just because of one loss, it would be unfair. She nodded in agreement. He then told her that he had been losing all the time at the academy, so she should trust him when he said there was no point in taking other people's selfish words to heart. Even if she lost once and others laughed at her, nothing would truly change. She knew he was right. It suddenly dawned on her that she had unconsciously convinced herself that her swordsmanship was useless, even though it was something she had built with her own determination and belief. With newfound clarity, she calmly admitted that she had learned a lot and politely thanked him. The crowd remained confused. Seline asked if this meant that Ian had won, while others murmured in amazement that he had now defeated the second year's top student twice. Some wondered just who the hell he really was. Meanwhile, the professor was pleased that Ian and Seria had reconciled and officially announced Ian as the winner of the match. Ian stepped off the stage while Seria, watching him go, silently swore that from that day forward, she would walk her own path, no matter what others said, just as Ian had taught her. Days later, Ian realized that things didn't always go the way people wanted them to. As he walked through the academy, he overheard students whispering about him. They referred to him as the rumored Ian Perkus, and speculated whether he was the so-called demon who had nearly killed Seria in their first match before forcing her to admit defeat in the second. Frustration welled up inside him. He knew he had only won because Seria hadn't shown her full strength. It wasn't because he was actually strong. Yet, he had to acknowledge that his aura detection and mana control had improved significantly compared to before. Still, no matter how many unnecessary movements Seria had made, if his skills had truly been worse than hers, he wouldn't have been able to win in the first place. That thought made him wonder again. What the hell had happened to him in the week he couldn't remember? Suddenly, he felt a tap on his shoulder. A voice asked if he was trying to recall that missing week. Turning around, he saw that it was Seline and Leto. He sighed and admitted that in the end, he still had no idea why he had been possessed. Seline told him that she was sure he was fine because the saintess at the cathedral had said so. However, he disagreed, reminding them that there were strange rumors about him everywhere. She brushed it off, asking who cared about some stupid rumors, adding that they weren't even bad ones. Before all of this, he had been looked down on as a low-ranking noble, but that was no longer the case. She then shyly admitted that it pissed her off whenever she heard people saying he had a nice face, but wasn't that attractive because he was just a countryside noble. He responded that it still meant they liked him, but before he could say anything else, she stepped on his foot, making him scream in pain. She then told him that thanks to him, even the high-ranking nobles had stopped treating them badly because they were scared he might crush them. Leto then asked if the rumor was true. Ian, confused, asked what rumor he was referring to, reminding them that there had been more than just one or two rumors about him lately. Leto clarified that people were saying Seria had been following him around ever since that day. Seline, suddenly angry, demanded to know if Seria was really following him. He simply told them to look to the side, but not to make it obvious. They all glanced to the side and saw Seria hiding behind a tree, wearing a mask, blushing as she stared at him. Seline fumed, asking if Seria seriously thought that disguise would work. She then shouted at Seria, demanding to know why she was following Ian and if she had already forgotten getting beaten half to death by him a while back. Ian and Leto did their best to hold Seline back as Leto asked when Seria had started following him. Ian sighed and replied that it had been going on for about 5 days, and that it was so annoying he felt like he was going to lose his mind. Leto quickly dragged Seline away, telling Ian to talk to Seria before she exploded. Ian reluctantly agreed. On the other hand, Seria was panicking, wondering what she should do. She knew she had to ask him as soon as possible, but before she could gather her thoughts, she was startled when he called out to her from behind. He told her that he had noticed she had been following him recently, and asked if there was something she wanted to talk about. She quickly took off her mask in shock, and asked how he had seen through her disguise, making him wonder if she actually believed it would work. Stammering, she shyly told him that she wanted to ask for his guidance because she wanted to become stronger. He blushed slightly, realizing that Seria had become much more polite compared to last week. But then, he wondered what he could even teach her. If they were talking about morals, that was a different story. But when it came to swordsmanship, there was nothing he could teach someone stronger than him. More importantly, he had finally gotten his normal life back, and he had no intention of getting involved with her again. He apologized, but told her that he would have to refuse. Her expression fell as she reminded him that he had won against her twice. He explained that it had nothing to do with his skill, she had simply let her guard down. As he turned to leave, he told her that the only reason he had won was pure luck, but she insisted that luck was also a skill. If he couldn't help her long term, then he should at least do it until the hunting festival. He froze at the mention of the hunting festival. The ridiculous letter had also mentioned it. That year, there had been several accidents during the festival, like Emma from the alchemy department, who had gone to gather medicinal herbs only to be attacked by a mysterious monster and found with her stomach ripped open. Seria hesitated before continuing, saying that there was no reason for him to help her. Before she could finish, he suddenly thanked her, realizing that he had remembered something important. He then turned and walked away, leaving her surprised and confused. As he left, he simply told her that if she wanted to get stronger, she should ask Professor Derek to teach her instead. Leto and Seline spotted Ian rushing off, and Leto asked where he was suddenly going and if he had settled things with Seria. Ian replied that he hadn't and explained that he had just remembered something else he needed to do, so he would see them later. Although he didn't believe everything written in the letter, the fact that his friend's name had been mentioned in it bothered him. He decided to check on her in person. Without wasting any time, he headed straight to the alchemy department, knowing that Emma would definitely have answers. Later, at the training ground, Seria was catching her breath as she repeatedly swung her sword in different positions. Professor Derek observed her and told her that it was good enough. She was almost there. He then explained that as long as she remained diligent, she should be able to form a well-rounded aura by the time the hunting festival arrived. Seria thanked him, and he laughed, admitting that he had never expected her to ask him for training. She excitedly responded that Ian had told her to seek his guidance, which confused Derek. A moment later, Seria suddenly snapped as she realized something. Regaining her composure, she calmly told Derek that she would be taking her leave, as it didn't seem like he had anything else to teach her. Derek smiled to himself, thinking that Seria still lacked social skills as always, and told her they would see each other in their next class. She simply nodded and walked away. The next day, Derek met Seria again and told her that there was no need to rush. He mentioned that even that guy had only managed to place second in the hunting festival during his second year. Seria replied that it was odd for a professor to tell her not to push herself when she was simply eager to improve her grades. Derek then offered her a hint since it was her first hunting festival. He advised her to familiarize herself with the terrain and monsters of the southern forest, as that was where the festival would take place. He was certain that the upperclassmen had already started doing so. Seria asked if there were any strong monsters in the southern forest. Derek explained that while there were hardly any near the entrance, once she made it halfway into the forest, she would start encountering much more powerful creatures. She acknowledged his words and said she would try to go deeper next time, but Derek warned her not to go too far alone. He further explained that although most students could handle the monsters, records showed that as the hunting festival approached, the appearance of terrible monsters became more frequent. At the time of creation, the heavenly god Ars was born alongside light, while darkness gave birth to the evil god Omelos. Together with the flow of time, the heavenly god created the universe, establishing the law that time moves from the past to the future. If that law were ever overturned, the world would be plunged into chaos. To preserve the order of time, the heavenly god placed several restrictions upon it. Thus, if any being could defy that order, it would have to be an enemy of the heavenly god, an immensely powerful existence, someone like Delphilum. Emma, a student from the alchemy department, leaned back in her chair and asked Ian if he finally understood. He sighed and admitted that he didn't get it at all. Yawning, Emma reminded him that he was the one who had woken her up, despite the fact that she had been up all night. Not only that, but he had also barged in, slamming the door open after not seeing her for an entire month, and then had the nerve to say something ridiculous like he was glad she was okay. Annoyed, she told him that he really needed to learn some common sense, and that he always lost track of everything once he became focused on something. Ian tried to defend himself, asking her to cut him some slack and reminding her that they were friends. But Emma simply scoffed, questioning what kind of friend only ever came to her when he needed something. Feeling guilty, he apologized and admitted that he knew he had woken her up. Then, noticing that she seemed even meaner than usual, he asked if she wasn't being a little too harsh on him. Apologizing again, he then asked if she could explain things a little more simply. Emma smiled at his flustered state and said that at least he had the decency to apologize. Relenting, she agreed to summarize it for him one more time. She first asked if he agreed that anyone trying to defy time itself would need an immense amount of power. Ian nodded in agreement. She then explained that there was only one being in the world with that level of strength, Delphilum, the servant of the evil god. Ian's eyes widened as he asked if she was saying that the letters he had received had been sent by Delphilum. Emma fell silent for a moment, staring at him in disbelief, before finally telling him that he seriously needed to develop some common sense. Frustrated, he shouted that she was the one who had said it in the first place. Sighing, she admitted that if she had to name someone, it would indeed be Delphilum. But she still couldn't understand how a mythical being, one whose existence wasn't even certain, could have done something like that. Ian, still deep in thought, then asked what if it was the evil god's doing. Emma shrugged and replied that they didn't even know if the evil god truly existed either. Ian awkwardly laughed, realizing she had a point. Emma grabbed a potion and told him that, in any case, it was impossible to receive a letter from the future. She advised him to go back to his room and make sure he wasn't being paranoid. Ian wondered if Emma was being a little too harsh, treating him like an idiot just because he had said something crazy. But he supposed he was just as crazy for actually believing he had received a letter from the future. Emma suddenly remembered something and told him there was something she wanted to give him. She pulled out 2 potions, prompting Ian to ask what they were. She explained that they were presence-erasing drugs, a new product she had been working on, and asked him to test one out to see if it worked. Curious, Ian grabbed one of the potions and asked if drinking it would make him invisible. Emma clarified that it wouldn't make him invisible, just erase his presence. Without hesitation, he opened the bottle and drank it immediately. Emma was shocked, shouting at him, demanding to know what he was doing. After swallowing, he made a face and told her it tasted awful. Furious, she yelled at him for drinking it so carelessly, reminding him that it was valuable. Then, without warning, she attacked him. With a bruised eye, he asked if he was right in assuming that all he needed to do was check if it worked or not. He then suggested she close her eyes for a second while he hid. Annoyed but intrigued, Emma agreed, saying that more test results would be useful. She closed her eyes and focused, attempting to sense his presence. The potion's effect kicked in, and Ian was shocked when he realized he couldn't even feel his own existence. It was as if he had turned into a ghost. Excited, he playfully swung his hand in front of Emma, thinking that if he could remain silent while hiding, this ability would give him a tremendous advantage in the hunting festival. However, before he could enjoy his newfound stealth, Emma suddenly reached out and grabbed his clothes, causing the potion's effect to vanish instantly. Ian stammered in disbelief, asking how she had found him. She let go, making him stumble and slam onto the floor. Without hesitation, she told him that it was a no-go. Ian, still confused, asked what she meant and why it didn't work. She bluntly told him that it was because of his body odor. Completely embarrassed, he asked her what she meant by that. Emma explained that everyone has a unique scent that they themselves can't detect, and it hadn't crossed her mind when she tested the potion on herself. Ian, still flustered, quickly opened the door and told her good luck with her project. He then muttered to himself, wondering why he had even been worried about her when she was already insanely strong. Emma called after him, asking if he was heading back. He replied that now that he knew she was fine, he would drink the other test tube in the forest and report back to her later. Before he could leave, she suddenly seemed to remember something and told him not to go into the forest alone until the hunting festival. If he really had to, she insisted that he call her first. She reminded him that, as he already knew, the monsters there had been behaving strangely lately. She then smiled sweetly and added that this was the perfect time to put him to good use. Ian sighed, agreeing, and told her that since he was free, she should put him to good use. Later, Ian returned to his dorm room and saw another message placed on his desk. Frustrated, he crumpled it up, angrily demanding to know who the hell kept sending him these letters. Lying down on his bed, he reassured himself that Emma would be fine since he had already warned her not to go alone. Before he could relax, Leto suddenly burst into his room, furious. He demanded to know where Ian had run off to earlier, complaining that thanks to him, he had been stuck calming down an enraged Seline. Ian sat up and asked Leto if it had been him. He then grumbled about how much Emma had mocked him because of the letters. Leto, confused, asked what he was talking about. What letters? Had he gone to see Emma? And how was she doing? Ian decided to brush it off, thinking that, for once, Leto had actually managed to hold things together. Annoyed, he then shouted at Leto not to bring up someone dying again next time because it was too much. Leto, completely caught off guard, stared at him in shock. He then shouted back, reminding Ian that all he had asked was how Emma was doing. He demanded to know why Ian was suddenly talking nonsense. In the trash can, the discarded letter lay crumpled. Its contents read, "It all started with Emma, a student from the alchemy department, gathering medicinal herbs. She was suddenly attacked by an unknown monster and was later found with her stomach ripped open." Leto once again asked Ian how Emma was doing. Ian, without hesitation, replied that Emma was fine. How could Emma not be fine? Yet at that moment, he didn't realize Emma was already in the forest, with her stomach torn open. The next day at the church, Emma lay in bed, teetering between life and death as the saintess worked to heal her body. Ian and Leto knelt beside her, praying alongside the saintess. When she finished, the saintess turned to them and explained that Emma had been found at the entrance of the forest. According to the scouts, it was likely the work of a monster. She added that monsters rarely appeared in that area, which meant Emma must have let her guard down. However, drinking a potion that made her appear dead after she was wounded had ultimately saved her life. Ian, desperate, told the saintess that if it was her divine power, then she could save Emma. But she calmly explained that divine power was not all-powerful. She said that if they could provide something of great value as an offering, they might be able to perform a miracle. Frustrated, Ian angrily reminded her that an herbalist's daughter wouldn't have access to such valuable resources. The saintess, unfazed, clarified that the offering wasn't about monetary value, but about the difficulty of obtaining it in the first place. Unfortunately, she told them, they had to prepare themselves for the worst. She then informed them that Emma's father would be arriving soon. It would be difficult to explain the situation to him, so if they wished to entrust that task to the clergy, they could leave now. Ian, however, refused. He insisted on staying, saying that he was the last person to see Emma before the attack, and that he had to be the one to tell her father. It might be their last chance to speak. The saintess reassured him that it was no one's fault and urged him not to blame himself. She then prays to regain her peace of mind before leaving. Leto, overcome with rage, suddenly punched the wall and shouted, demanding to know why a monster had appeared at the entrance of the forest. He cried out that if it hadn't been there, Emma could have escaped. Ian was about to calm him down when they both heard a broken voice calling out for Emma. Turning around, Ian saw an old man sobbing, calling for his daughter. The sight made Ian's heart sink. Ian hesitantly asked if he was Emma's father. The man, barely holding himself together, looked up and asked if Ian knew his daughter. Emma's father fell to his knees, begging Ian to help them, to at least let him see Emma's face. But for hygiene and safety reasons, the priests wouldn't allow it. There was nothing Ian could do. He clenched his fists, thinking that if only they had powerful backing, if only they had the money for an offering, maybe they could have done something. But for countryside nobles like them, all they could do was tell Emma's father that the priests were doing everything they could to heal her. After Emma's father calmed down a little, Ian pulled out a potion. He explained that Emma had given it to him just yesterday, telling him that it was a new potion she was proud to have developed. He said that rather than keeping it himself, Emma's father should be the one to hold on to his daughter's achievement. However, Emma's father refused. Instead, he grabbed Ian's shoulder and begged him to use it. In exchange, he pleaded with him never to forget Emma. Ian stood there, asking himself if there was truly nothing he could do. He thought that he could have prevented all of this. If only he had taken the letter more seriously. If only he had given Emma a clearer warning before he left. He didn't know if the letter was truly from the future, or if the events written in it were real, but he knew one thing. Something about it felt impossible to ignore. Determined, he made a decision. He would find Sepia, the one who wrote the letters, and make sure that the events described in them never came to pass. The next day, Leto gave him a puzzled look and asked who Sepia was, and if Ian had finally gotten a girlfriend. Leto added that he never thought he'd see the day Ian showed interest in a woman. Annoyed, Ian shoved Leto's face away and told him to stop rambling. He reminded him that he had already said he needed to find the person who wrote the letters. Leto asked if he had checked the student register. Ian replied that he had, but there was no record of anyone named Sepia. Leto then teasingly remarked that the name Sepia might be fake and wondered what kind of woman was making Ian that anxious. Ian, irritated, shouted that it was nothing like that and questioned why he would be anxious. Frustrated, he added that there was simply something he wanted to ask Sepia. However, Leto continued teasing, asking if Ian intended to ask Sepia to be his girlfriend, which angered him even more and led him to hit Leto. After getting smacked, Leto finally agreed to stop teasing and instead asked if he was correct in thinking that Sepia was the name of a flower. Ian confirmed this, explaining that it was why he wasn't sure whether it was a real name or an alias. Leto speculated that it was likely a nickname related to the sepia flower and mentioned that the name was fairly common in the north, suggesting that the person might be from that region. Hearing this, Ian suddenly realized something and wondered if the north wasn't the territory of the Ordina family. Leto then offered to ask around, but noted that if Ian was referring to someone from the north, only one person came to mind. Turning to his side, Leto gestured towards someone and remarked that Ian's crazy fan was standing right over there. Ian followed Leto's gaze and saw Seria hiding behind a tree, staring at him. Ian admitted that Seria was the first person he thought of when the north was mentioned. Leto pointed out that the only noble family he knew from the snow-covered north was the Ordinas. However, Leto couldn't understand why Seria would send a letter under a fake name instead of just speaking to him directly. Frustrated, he shouted at Leto to leave. Approaching Seria, Ian was about to speak when she shyly handed him a bag, explaining that it was compensation for teaching her. When Ian opened it, he was shocked to see a large amount of gold inside. Bewildered, he questioned what she meant by compensation, knowing that the gold was worth far more than expected. Seria explained that after asking for his guidance previously, she realized it was bad manners not to offer something in return. Ian reassured her that it wasn't rude at all and insisted that he couldn't possibly accept such a large amount. Curious, he then asked why she was so desperate for his guidance. Seria responded that she didn't believe she had anything left to learn from anyone else. Ian briefly thought she had matured, but he quickly realized that this behavior was likely only in front of him. Seria further explained that there was always something to learn from people who had yet to be surpassed. Ian reminded her that he didn't have the ability to teach someone like her and asked if she wasn't already progressing well on her own. He added that, even without his guidance, he was sure she would reach greater heights on her own one day. However, Seria simply stated that if she missed that year's hunting festival, she wouldn't have another chance. At that moment, Ian recalled that the letter mentioned Sepia also participating in that year's hunting festival. Before Seria could finish speaking, he grabbed her shoulders and firmly stated that they should train together. Inwardly, he resolved to find out if Seria was Sepia. Days later, Ian started training with Seria, but despite his efforts, he still couldn't determine whether she was Sepia. However, he learned other things about her. First, Seria had no social skills. She had earned the nickname Rude Ordina, but not because she had any ill intent. She was simply terrible at interacting with others. Second, Seria didn't understand the concept of rest. Ian had heard that high-ranking nobles often trained without breaks by relying on healing potions. He soon realized that Seria was one of those people. One day, Seria injured herself during training. Ian immediately asked if she was okay, but she dismissed the concern, stating that a single potion would heal the wound. Ian, however, grabbed her injured leg and questioned whether she truly understood that potions were not a cure-all. He explained that they did not relieve the tension and fatigue in her joints, which was why proper pacing during training was necessary. Recalling something she had mentioned earlier, he asked if it was true that this year was her last chance. He wanted to understand what exactly she meant by that, and why it was causing her so much anxiety. Seria hesitated before replying that there was someone in the 4th year she wanted to defeat. Ian pointed out that just because that person was graduating, it didn't mean it was the end. She could always meet them again and challenge them to a match if she had to. After finishing the bandage on her leg, Seria quietly admitted that the more time passed, the fewer opportunities she had to challenge them. Ian, confused, asked what she meant by that. Seria took a deep breath and explained that if she were to challenge the head of her family, she would be exiled immediately. Ian, shocked, questioned whether he was thinking correctly about who she intended to fight. Seria confirmed that she wanted to defeat the top student of the 4th year swordsmanship department, Delphine Ordina. She then revealed that Delphine was her half-sister and would become the head of the Ordina family after graduation. Looking at Ian, Seria asked if it was true that he had said she would still have a chance to challenge Delphine even after she graduated. Ian affirmed it. However, Seria shook her head and stated that it wasn't true, explaining that the academy was the only place where a direct heir and a branch family member could be judged equally. Seria then recalled lying defeated on the ground, thinking that changing the rules of a one-on-one match was unfair. However, Delphine simply approached her and teasingly praised her for fighting, despite being unable to form any alliances. She reminded Seria that gathering people and using them was a skill in itself. Seria remained composed, knowing that everyone in the Ordina family sided with her sister. There was no way she could make allies among them, but deep down, she wished for her own allies. She was lost in thought when Ian informed her that he was finished and that she should be able to move now. Blushing, she stared at him, thinking that if he were one of her allies, they could win. With that thought in mind, she planned to ask him to become her ally. The Hunting Festival, a cherished event of Emperor Aeolus. As one of the major competitions held at the Academy, the festival tested who could hunt the strongest magical beasts. The magical beasts in the southern forest where the festival took place were left undisturbed throughout the year specifically for this purpose. Ian found himself troubled by two things: Seria, who had to participate in the hunting festival, and Sepia, who was supposed to have become close to him during the event. He didn't understand what either of them had to do with him, yet the thoughts kept bothering him. Suddenly, Seline came running toward the hunting grounds and called out to him, insisting that they should go together. Confused, he asked why she was in such a rush, but instead of answering, she shot back a question, asking if he was an idiot. Annoyed, he demanded to know where that came from. Seline then explained that normally, no one would want to train with someone they had just beaten in a match. Ian, unconcerned, responded that it had only been a match and that they had made up afterward. Hearing that they had reconciled, Seline was visibly irritated and questioned whether Seria had been following him around after their match. Ian sighed and explained that Seria had only wanted to ask him something and that she was no longer following him. However, Seline remained frustrated and demanded to know why he was taking Seria's side so much. Without warning, Ian grabbed her face, surprising her. She stuttered, asking what he was doing as he leaned in closer and sniffed her hair. He then asked if she had changed her perfume. Embarrassed, she stammered that it wasn't perfume but possibly the scent of her new facial cleanser. Meanwhile, Ian felt relieved that he had successfully changed the subject. Seline then asked if he knew what practical exercises they would be doing that day, mentioning that it was her first time participating. Ian replied that it would probably involve exploring the forest and learning about the environment. Seline expressed her hope that they wouldn't run into any magical beasts. However, Ian remained silent, knowing that under normal circumstances they wouldn't encounter any. But according to the letter, there was supposed to be a magical beast attack. A proper response could prevent major casualties, but there was still a high possibility that many people could die. Determined, he resolved to prevent the disaster at all costs, knowing he was the only one aware of the letter's warning. Shortly after, Derek arrived and called for everyone's attention to go over some important points before they began. He reminded them of the student who had recently been attacked by a magical beast at the entrance of the forest. The fact that the beast had come so close to the entrance, despite normally avoiding that area, meant they too might encounter one. He urged everyone to be careful. As Derek spoke, Ian noticed Seria staring at him from the side. Feeling awkward, he looked away, causing Seria to blush shyly. Derek continued, explaining that the forest was dense with trees, making it difficult to swing a sword freely. He advised everyone to remain aware of their surroundings while moving or attacking. Ian stared at Derek's sword, knowing that the magical beasts in the forest were completely accustomed to the terrain. If they encountered them, they would be at a disadvantage. However, Derek then raised his sword and released his aura, explaining that if they were sword experts capable of materializing their aura, it would be a different story. Even if their sword's trajectory was blocked, with each swing, everything in its path would be cut down. Despite this, no matter how skilled a swordsman was, they could never completely ignore the environment. Derek then directed their attention to a tree he had destroyed with his slashes, emphasizing that situations like these could determine whether they won or lost. He lectured them on the importance of maintaining proper distance in battle, which was crucial for swordsmen. Because of this, their training for the day would involve practical exercises using the forest's environment. He then ordered them to form pairs, allowing them to move freely during training. However, due to the recent incident, he warned them not to go near the middle of the forest. If they sensed any danger, they were to prioritize escaping and reporting the situation. Ian knew that if a group of magical beasts were to appear as the letter had warned, staying together would help concentrate their strength and make them easier to deal with. Even so, gathering everyone together without a clear reason would make them look crazy. In the end, all he could do was quickly inform the professor if he spotted any signs of a magical beast attack. Since a battle might break out while he was investigating, he was obviously teaming up with someone. But before he could finish his thought, Seline excitedly called his name and asked if she was right in assuming he would team up with her. Ignoring her completely, he grabbed Seria and declared that they should team up instead, leaving Seline behind in frustration. Deep in the forest. A while later, Ian was walking through the forest with Seria as his partner. They were still within the area Derek had permitted them to explore, but so far, not a single magical beast had appeared. Finding it strange, he asked Seria if she thought it was unusual. She agreed, stating that she hadn't sensed the presence of any magical beasts. As they continued walking, Ian considered that there was no way someone as skilled as Seria at detecting magical beasts would fail to notice their presence. He then suggested that they take a break, but reminded her not to lower her guard. Seria assured him that it wouldn't be a problem. When the sun began to set, they found themselves in the middle of the forest, resting. Seria stood in front of him, seemingly nervous. After a moment of hesitation, she asked why he had chosen to team up with her. He casually replied that it was because they were friends. Surprised, she asked if he was the only one who considered them friends. She then hesitantly asked if she should offer him something in return for being his friend, leaving Ian confused. Stuttering, she suggested that when they returned to the dorms, she could give him gold or something similar. Ian, realizing her misunderstanding, explained that friendship wasn't a transaction. If there was an exchange involved, it wouldn't be friendship but a business deal. He further explained that friends talked to each other, went on walks together, and spent time with one another without expecting anything in return. They were people with whom they could share things they couldn't tell others. Seria then asked if she could pose a somewhat rude question now that they were friends. Ian agreed, curious about what she wanted to ask. He was then completely taken aback when she questioned whether the reason they had ventured so deep into the forest was because his friend had been attacked there, and if it was all for the sake of taking revenge on the magical beasts. Ian, caught off guard, hesitated before admitting that he didn't know. However, Seria pressed him further, asking why he was doing this and what his reason was. Overwhelmed, he snapped and shouted that he had already said he didn't know. In that moment, memories of Emma flooded his mind. His hands trembled slightly as he muttered that it wasn't for revenge. He had come this far simply to search for magical beasts. Seria looked at him with sadness in her eyes and asked if this was what friendship was supposed to be, and if it was something friends did for each other. Ian, still uncertain, replied that he didn't know. He asked if it wasn't something that just happened naturally and then questioned what she would do if he were attacked by a magical beast. Without hesitation, Seria firmly stated that she would want to take the magical beast down. Ian nodded, telling her that this was exactly how he felt. Emma was his friend, and that was why he was doing this. At that moment, Seria seemed to finally understand the meaning of friendship. Ian reassured her that he wasn't an idiot and that he wouldn't recklessly rush into battle against the magical beasts. He had to ensure they weren't in any immediate danger first. Suddenly, a low growl echoed nearby, surprising him. He immediately asked Seria if she had heard it. She, confused, responded that she wasn't sensing anything in particular. However, Ian motioned for her to stay quiet and focused. Seria's expression changed, her eyes widening in shock. She whispered that she had spotted multiple shining eyes glowing in the darkness ahead, hidden among the trees. Realizing the situation, Seria anxiously stated that if there were that many, the students in the forest were in danger. Seria grabbed her sword and asked if they should attack, but Ian immediately refused, telling her that they were going to run away. There was no need for them to fight, and the safest and best option was to inform Derek. He then asked if she was ready. When she nodded, he shouted for them to run, and they sprinted back. A moment later, as they continued running, Ian felt that one of the magical beasts was chasing them. However, given the distance, they should have been able to escape. If they could maintain their pace and alert Derek, that would be the best outcome. But suddenly he stopped when he heard Seria scream. Looking back, he saw her on the ground in pain. He immediately asked if she was all right, and she replied that she thought she had twisted her ankle, the same one she had injured during training. She then told him that she would be fine once she put a brace on it and insisted that since it was her fault, he should leave her behind. Otherwise, the magical beast would catch him too. Ian hadn't expected this to happen and could feel the magical beasts rapidly closing the distance. He then told Seria to go on ahead, which shocked her. She protested, questioning what he was saying when she was the one at fault, but he simply told her not to say such things to her friends. He then ran forward, ignoring Seria's worried calls for him to stop. The forest around him was eerily silent, and he realized that the smaller animals had instinctively sensed the presence of predators and had immediately gone into hiding. Stopping in the middle of the path, he knew there was no need to face the beasts head-on. Instead, he planned to ambush them. Taking out the potion Emma had given him, he drank it all in one go and threw the empty tube onto the ground. His presence immediately began to fade, though he grimaced at the familiar, disgusting taste of the potion. As long as he had it, he would be able to reach them before they noticed him, and that would give him the advantage he needed to deal with them. Next, he rushed to a patch of mud and herbs, applying them all over his body. Since the potion didn't eliminate his scent, he thoroughly covered himself with soil and grass to mask it. Then, he stabbed his sword into a tree, knowing that if he hid somewhere out of sight, the beasts wouldn't be able to detect him. Climbing up into the branches, he settled in and looked down, quietly waiting for the beast to come to him. Minutes later, in the silent forest, one of the beasts arrived. Ian immediately noted its features: ashen fur, black eyes, huge fangs, and a body larger than a grown man. The beast exuded magic energy, confirming that it was a demon beast. It seemed confused, sniffing the air, likely because the scent it had been tracking had suddenly vanished. Taking advantage of the moment, Ian jumped down from the tree and rushed toward the beast. It sensed him too late. By the time it reacted, his sword was already stabbing into its head. However, his aura wasn't dense enough to pierce it completely. Realizing this, he used all his weight to force the blade deeper. With one final push, he successfully drove his sword through the beast's skull, killing it. Despite his victory, he was shocked at how difficult it was to take down just one of them. He wondered how many more he could handle before reaching his limit. Hiding in the tall bush nearby, he forced himself to focus. Now wasn't the time to despair. If even one of the magical beasts got past him, Seria's life would be in danger. Swearing to stop them all, he kept his gaze locked on the road ahead. Moments later, the other magical beasts began arriving. Observing them, Ian noted that since they were wolf-like demon beasts, they naturally moved in packs. While he could only see one at first, he could sense the presence of many more surrounding him. They were scattered, searching for him. Based on their movements, he estimated that at least 5 of them were prowling the area. Taking the opportunity, he rushed toward one of them and stabbed it before it could alert the others. The beast howled in pain. Ian tried to push his sword deeper, but its skin was too tough to pierce through completely. With no other choice, he attempted to slash it instead, but the beast dodged and countered by biting his hand. He was about to scream in pain but stopped himself, knowing that if he raised his voice, the other magical beasts would surround him. Clenching his teeth, he lifted his other hand, gripping an axe, and swung it down onto the beast's head. He raised the axe again and struck once more, finally killing the second magical beast. Looking at the axe, he realized how useful it was in close combat. His senses had also become much sharper since he had been possessed by the evil spirit. His reaction time had definitely improved, just as it had when he fought Seria. Whatever the reason, he acknowledged that the evil spirit had done something beneficial for him. He started to believe that in this state, he could take down any number of magical beasts. Back at the starting point, Seline furiously threw her sword to the ground, shouting that Ian pissed her off. Frustrated, she repeatedly stomped on her sword while yelling about how dare Ian choose to team up with that woman instead of her. She continued ranting, declaring that she was so mad, and that she bet Ian and Seria were off having a romantic date in the forest. However, her tantrum was interrupted when Seria arrived, panting and panicked, urgently calling out for Derek. Derek rushed over and immediately asked what had happened. Seria, still catching her breath, managed to explain that there were a large number of demon beasts, and that Ian had stayed behind alone to protect her after she got injured. For a moment, Derek was stunned in shock. However, he quickly composed himself and assured her that he understood the situation. He ordered her to stay put and wait while he rushed into the forest, promising that he would save Ian. Seline and her teammates were thrown into a panic. Meanwhile, Seria struggled to stand up, but the pain from her injury overwhelmed her. She collapsed onto her knees, gripping the ground as she pleaded for Ian to be safe. Deep in the forest, another magical beast walked forward and found 4 of its fallen kin lying in the same position. It sniffed at one of the corpses, unaware that Ian was hiding behind it. Just as the beast raised its head to howl, Ian suddenly emerged from hiding and drove his sword into its throat, killing it instantly. However, before he could catch his breath, he heard more howls in the distance and cursed loudly. Looking up, he saw 2 more beasts near him, both growling and ready to attack. As they rushed toward him, he remained calm, gripping his axe tightly, and muttered an insult at the wolves, telling them to come at him. The beasts landed near him and began circling, running around him at high speed. He knew they were much faster than regular wolves due to their magical nature, but at the end of the day, they were still just beasts with simple, predictable movements. Initially, he thought fighting multiple enemies at once would be difficult, but if this was all they had, he could handle it. Timing his moment perfectly, he jumped and slashed both beasts as they passed him, striking one with his sword and the other with his axe. Looking around, he shouted at the remaining beasts to come out, declaring that he would take care of all of them. A moment later, Ian stood amidst a pile of magical beast corpses. He believed he had taken care of them all, but he could still sense one more nearby. Looking toward the forest, he spotted a lone beast lurking in the shadows, watching him. Unlike the others, it wasn't coming any closer, making him wonder what it was planning. Was it trying to set up a trap, waiting for him to make a mistake? Leaning against a tree to catch his breath, he admitted that it was surprisingly clever for a beast. But at the same time, there was no real reason to fight it either. Then, he caught a scent in the air. The moment he recognized it, his entire body tensed. He had smelled it before, either in the alchemy classroom or in Emma's workshop. Startled, he trembled with anger as realization hit him. Glaring at the beast, his suspicions were confirmed when he noticed a piece of fabric caught in its mouth. It was unmistakably a torn piece of Emma's robe. His grip on his sword tightened as he pointed it at the beast, declaring that it was going to die right there and now. The beast approached him slowly, the fabric between its teeth. Then, as if mocking him, it casually dropped the piece of cloth onto his sword. Ian clenched his jaw in fury as the beast stepped forward with what looked like a twisted grin. It was almost as if it was laughing, confident that it would win. He guessed that it intended to cut him down just as he had slaughtered its kin. But he swore that he wouldn't let things play out the way it wanted. Unlike the other beasts that attacked immediately, this one was cautious. Ian quickly realized that it wasn't an ordinary magical beast, it was a high-ranking one. If he made the wrong move, he could die. He would have to test it out first. Without warning, the beast lunged, appearing in front of him in an instant. Ian barely had time to react before its claws slashed across his chest, sending him flying backward with tremendous force. He crashed onto the ground, pain radiating through his body. Cursing loudly, he realized that the beast was far too fast. He had seen it coming, but his body hadn't been able to react in time. Before he could recover, the beast launched another high-speed attack. Desperate, he threw his sword in its direction. To his surprise, the beast didn't dodge, and the blade struck its mouth, knocking out several of its teeth. Seizing the moment, he jumped above it, gripping his axe tightly and swung it down at its face. However, he was shocked when he saw that his axe barely left a scratch. The beast's body was far tougher than he had expected. It then twisted midair, rolling into a somersault before lashing out with its claws. Fortunately, Ian managed to block the attack with his axe, though the sheer force of the impact rattled his arms. As the beast landed perfectly on all fours, Ian found himself momentarily stunned. It was actually performing somersaults mid-combat. Scoffing, he muttered that he should sell it to a circus or something, maybe beat it half to death first, then hand it over to performers. Despite the joke, he knew the situation was dire. The beast had cracked some of its teeth when it bit down on his sword, so it likely couldn't use its bite anymore. But even so, he still had to worry about its other attacks. Unfortunately for him, he was in far worse condition. He had taken the full force of its first attack, and if it launched another high-speed strike, he wasn't sure he could dodge in time. As if reading his thoughts, the beast suddenly dashed toward him again. This time, he narrowly managed to shift his body to the side, avoiding a direct hit. However, before he could counter, the beast swung its claws at him again. He ducked just in time, realizing that it had him beat in both stamina and speed. He then swung his axe at the beast, knowing that the longer the fight dragged on, the worse his chances would be. The beast dodged effortlessly, its grin widening as if it were toying with him. Realizing he had to end it while it was still playing with him, he sighed inwardly. It wasn't the way he wanted to fight. It was reckless and dangerous, but at this point, he had no other choice. The beast then attacked Ian with its breath skill, and he was caught off guard when it hit him, sending him flying and slamming him into a tree. He collapsed onto the ground as the beast slowly approached. However, despite the pain, he remained steady and didn't move, even though he was fully conscious. The beast, seemingly victorious, walked closer, relishing in its triumph. Ian knew that it wasn't killing him immediately, just as it hadn't with Emma. It had played with her, ripping her belly open as though it were toying with its prey. As the beast prepared to slash his stomach the same way, it suddenly let out a piercing scream of pain. Blood dripped onto Ian's feet as he successfully drove his sword into its throat. Using the last of his aura, he forced the blade deeper. Ian had known that if he pretended to be weak, the beast would lower its guard and expose its vulnerable spots. He then muttered to it that it had eagerly walked up to him, ready to tear his stomach open without realizing that its own guts were about to be ripped out. With a sharp pull, he withdrew his sword from its throat and with all his strength, slashed across its stomach. The beast howled in agony as blood gushed from its deep wound. As it lay writhing on the ground, Ian stood over it, lecturing that it should have learned to kill its prey immediately instead of toying with them, especially when facing someone stronger. He kicked its body and stated that its arrogance was what had ultimately led to its death. Raising his sword, now glowing with his aura, he shouted for the beast to remember the name of the one who killed it. With one final powerful slash, he cut through its stomach, ensuring its death while warning it not to forget. Meanwhile, nearby, Derek was sprinting deeper into the forest, his mind filled with thoughts of Ian. Desperation gripped him as he silently begged for Ian to still be alive. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the air, and Derek's sharp eyes caught the aftermath of a massive slash. He immediately wondered if it had come from Ian. As he ran, he noticed the corpses of magical beasts scattered across the ground. Sensing two presences a short distance ahead, he quickly deduced that one of them was a beast, while the other had to be Ian. Moments later, Seline caught up to him, her face filled with worry. She frantically asked where Ian was. Derek, scanning the surroundings, replied that Ian wasn't there, which shocked her. She demanded to know where he was, but Derek simply looked ahead and told her that they would find out if they kept going. Without hesitation, they pressed forward. Just minutes later, a voice called out to them. Turning toward the sound, Seline saw Ian sitting next to the massive corpse of a magical beast. With a weary smile, Ian asked if they weren't a bit too late. Seline's eyes filled with tears, while the other students and Derek stood frozen in shock, staring at the enormous slain beast behind him. Ian then called out to Derek, but before he could say another word, his body gave out, and he collapsed from pain and exhaustion. Later, when Ian woke up, he found himself in the temple. According to the Saintess, Derek had carried him there after he lost consciousness following the battle with the magical beast. She also informed him that it would be a while before he was discharged, though he considered himself lucky to have escaped with only a hand injury. Despite everything, he was relieved that his gamble had paid off and that he had avenged Emma. However, he knew that his victory wouldn't change the fact that she was still in a coma. He then spoke to Leto, explaining that, according to Derek, the beast had been young for its size. If it had been more mature, it wouldn't have wasted time playing with its prey. Leto, unimpressed, scoffed at Ian's serious monologue and angrily called him a dumbass. Ian, annoyed, reminded Leto that he was a patient and told him that if he had just come to pick a fight, he should leave. Leto agreed, but added that Ian was a patient with some loose screws. He then sarcastically asked why Ian would risk his life just to act cool in front of a girl, calling him a lunatic. Ian, irritated, snapped back, demanding to know what Leto was talking about. Leto then asked if he was right in thinking that Ian still had the potion Emma had given him at that time. Ian confirmed it, explaining that it was thanks to Emma's potion that he had been able to kill the magical beast. Leto then questioned why he hadn't just given the potion to Seria instead. If he had let her drink it and hidden her atop a tree, he could have gone to fetch the professor instead of risking his life. Calling Ian an idiot, Leto pointed out that there had been no need for such reckless behavior. Ian was momentarily stunned by Leto's words, but soon realized that he was right. Seeing his reaction, Leto sighed and called him a hopeless dumbass, insisting that from now on, if Ian planned to do something, he should ask him first. Leto then casually mentioned that Seria Ordina was completely smitten with Ian, saying that he had seen Seria loitering outside the temple more than a dozen times a day. Ian found it strange that Seria didn't just go inside like a normal person and guessed that she must be feeling guilty. Before he could dwell on it further, Seline suddenly rushed into his room, calling his name. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him in a tight hug, relieved that he was awake. Leto, watching the scene, internally noted that Seline hadn't even acknowledged his presence. Seline, still holding on to Ian, expressed how glad she was that he was all right. However, after a moment, she bit his hand before demanding to know what they had been talking about. Leto, unfazed, replied that Ian was going to buy him a drink using the bounty reward for defeating the magical beast. Seline let go of Ian's hand, now confused, and asked what Leto meant by a reward. Leto casually explained that he had heard they were offering 70 gold for it. Ian, stunned, clutched his injured hand and shouted that he had never heard anything about a bounty. Leto then stood up, announcing that he was going to the bathroom and telling them to decide what they wanted to eat in the meantime. As soon as Leto left, Seline locked her hands around Ian's injured hand and asked where they should go. She then suggested eating some monster meat, causing Ian to scream in pain and shout at her that she was hurting him. Unbothered, she excitedly proposed going to a restaurant in the city's dining district that specialized in magical beasts. She had heard that they served the best drake meat. Ian, still in pain, yelled at her, demanding to know if that was really something she should be talking about to someone who was injured. Hearing his words, Seline suddenly looked sad. Ian immediately apologized, explaining that he wasn't mad at her. However, before he could say anything more, she hugged him tightly. With deep sincerity, she admitted that she had been really worried about him and had truly thought he had died. Ian sighed, gently patting her head, and reassured her by asking if she really thought he would die that easily. As he did, he realized that Seline had a surprisingly pleasant scent. Suddenly, Seline furiously demanded to know why he kept putting himself in danger all the time. She then loudly declared that she didn't care what happened to Seria. The only thing that mattered to her was that he was safe. Ian tried to explain that he couldn't just abandon someone he knew when they were in danger. But before he could finish, Seline smacked him and yelled that he was missing the point. She then confidently declared that he was the most important person in the world to her and that nothing else mattered. She added that it had always been that way, ever since they were children. Ian, caught off guard, wondered what had gotten into Seline all of a sudden. As she slowly crawled closer to him, she softly said that was why she wanted him to take better care of himself. Ian began sweating, wondering if the shock of the situation had been too much for her. She then reached out, gently holding his hand before grabbing his face. He tensed as she told him to stay still. Just as she was about to kiss him, a loud sound interrupted them. Both of them screamed in shock as they turned toward the source. Standing in the doorway, Leto smirked. He sighed dramatically, saying that he felt bad for interrupting such an important moment between his dear friend and a junior he considered like a little sister, but he thought it was only right to let them know he was there too. Ian, still sweating, exhaled deeply. That had been too close. He found himself questioning what he had almost done with someone he had always treated like a younger sister. Meanwhile, Seline, now completely furious, turned on Leto, angrily shouting at him. Without another word, she stormed out, yelling at both of them to forget about what had just happened. Once Seline was gone, Leto turned to Ian, pointing at him with a knowing look. He then warned that if Ian planned to keep getting along with Seria, he had better watch out for Seline too. The world of women, Leto said, was far more complicated than Ian could ever imagine. Ian scratched his face in confusion, wondering what Leto meant. However, he realized that he really should have taken Leto's warning more seriously. In the end, because of him, Seria and Seline's relationship took a turn for the worse. The next day at the academy, students were gossiping about Seria. Rumors spread that despite being the top student among the second years in the swordsmanship department, she had run away from the magical beasts. Whispers circulated, saying that the esteemed senior Seria had been paired with a real talent, yet she had turned out to be all talk and no substance. Seria ignored them, knowing they weren't wrong. It was true that she had run away. It was also true that Ian had been the one to defeat the magical beasts. She couldn't deny it. She thought about how Ian hadn't even needed to fight. It had been her mistake, her responsibility. Yet Ian had taken the battle upon himself, and even told her not to call it her mistake in front of their friends. Her mind replayed the moment when Derek had carried Ian's unconscious body on his back, urgently calling for an emergency response. She remembered Derek shouting for the temple to prepare for an operation immediately. Ian had nearly died because of her. She found herself wondering why Ian had risked his life for her. In the past, she wouldn't have been able to answer that question. But now, she felt like she understood. At least a little. Ian was the first person she had ever felt comfortable around. No matter how harshly she spoke or how much she complained, Ian never scolded her or pushed back, as if simply being was enough. As if it was okay for her to just be herself. Before she realized it, she had begun to feel something unfamiliar. She didn't want to lose him. Maybe, just maybe, she could finally understand, just a little, how Ian must have felt when he faced the beasts. Just as she didn't want to lose Ian, he hadn't wanted to lose her, because friends don't want each other to die. At the temple, Seria entered the temple and hesitated at the door, peeking inside Ian's hospital room. As she saw him resting on the bed, a realization struck her. Ian was the first friend she had ever made in her life. Gathering her courage, she shyly approached him and, after a brief hesitation, stuttered as she asked if he had been well. Ian replied that he was fine and that he hardly felt any pain now. Hearing that, Seria let out a small sigh of relief, saying she was glad to hear it. Ian then told her he was happy she came, though he was struggling because of the book Leto had given him to study for the exam. He then asked if it was safe to assume that she hadn't changed either. Seria looked down, her gaze landing on the bag full of gold she was holding. After a pause, she hesitantly asked if he was not angry. Ian, confused by the question, realized she was worried about what had happened. He asked why he would be angry when there was nothing for him to be mad about. Seria's expression brightened, and she excitedly asked if he was really not angry. Ian noticed how her emotions seemed all over the place, but reassured her not to worry too much, reminding her that it was only natural for friends to help each other. Hearing those words, Seria smiled. Ian then pointed to the bag she was holding and asked if it was compensation again. Seria immediately shook her head and explained that it was the reward money Derek had given her, the official reward for defeating the magical beasts. She handed it to him, saying that Derek had told her to give it to him as soon as possible. Ian looked at the gold inside the bag, his voice slightly unsteady as he asked if it wasn't too much. Suspicious, he then asked if she had added extra. Seria simply looked away. Realizing what she had done, Ian sighed and pushed the bag back to her, telling her that there was no need to insist it was his reward for saving her life. He added that her life wasn't something that could be bought with gold, so she should take the extra amount back. Seria was startled when their hands accidentally touched, her face turning shy at the unexpected contact. Suddenly, Celine's voice rang through the room as she excitedly called Ian's name, greeting him with a cheerful good morning. However, the moment she saw Seria standing there, her expression immediately darkened. Her mood shifted in an instant, and just as Seria was about to thank her, Seline deliberately pushed past her and ignored her completely, heading straight to Ian's bedside. Ian, stunned by Celine's behavior, asked her why she had done that. Meanwhile, Seria had been knocked off balance and had fallen to her knees on the floor. Seria slowly stood up, brushed herself off, and with a calm smile said that she would be taking her leave since she hadn't finished her morning training yet. Celine, still fuming, then coldly called Seria a rude, impudent brat. Her voice was sharp as she then asked Seria whose fault she thought it was that Ian had ended up in the hospital in the first place. Ian shouted at Seline, demanding to know why she was being so mean. However, Seline dismissed his concern, telling him to forget about Seria and focus on deciding what they were going to eat when he got discharged. He then recalled Leto lecturing him about how the world of women is far more complicated than he could imagine. For the first time, he wondered if this was what Leto had meant. Still frustrated, Ian told Seline that she was missing the point, but she simply declared that the matter was settled and that they were going out to eat as soon as he could leave. Meanwhile, Seria walked out of the temple, clutching the bag of gold tightly. Her head was lowered, and her expression was filled with sadness. Not far from the temple, a student named Lupin noticed Seria and sneered. Turning to his friends, he commented that Seria was even more of an eyesore than before and suggested that they should completely crush her. Lupin continued, complaining that he had already barely tolerated the way Derek pampered Seria just because she was the top student. But now, she had abandoned her friend and run away alone. Raising his voice, he declared that Seria was a disgrace to nobility. Lupin then asked his friends if Seria had any weaknesses and insisted that they needed to crush her completely once again. However, one of his companions, Teen, hesitated. He turned to Lupin and asked if he was sure about this. He reminded Lupin that no one should mess with the Ordinas. One wrong move, and they would retaliate. He urged everyone to behave themselves. Suddenly, a voice interrupted them. A woman approached, commenting that she had just overheard a very interesting conversation. With a confident smile, she added that if they had time, she could tell them something about Seria. Lupin, irritated by the interruption, demanded to know who the hell she was and shouted at her not to butt into their conversation. Before he could continue, Teen quickly ordered him to stop and asked the woman what exactly she wanted to tell them. Still smiling, the woman removed her hood and calmly stated that the information was about Seria's birth. She then assured them that they wouldn't have to worry about any retaliation from the Ordinas, because she could personally guarantee it. The next day, Ian visited Emma, standing by her bedside and staring at her sadly. Regret weighed heavily on him as he thought that if only he had believed the contents of the letter, this could have been prevented. He had already confirmed that 2 of the events written in the letter had come true: the attack on Emma and the magical beasts appearing in the forest. This meant that there was a high probability that the next prediction, the appearance of a monster at the hunting festival, would also come true. If the letter referred to it as a monster, then it must be even stronger than the magical beasts he had just fought. Clenching his fists, he acknowledged that if that were the case, he wouldn't be able to stop it alone. He had no choice. He had to ask Derek for help in defeating it. As he stood by Emma's bedside, the Saintess called out to him, surprised to see him. She asked if he had come to visit Emma, thinking he had already been discharged. Ian replied that he had just stopped by for a bit before heading out. He then asked her about Emma's condition. The Saintess explained that with continued treatment, they could keep Emma alive, but that didn't mean she would recover. As she began her daily healing session for Emma, Ian suddenly recalled something she had mentioned before. He reminded her that she had once said a valuable offering could completely cure Emma. Curious, he asked what kind of offering she had meant. The Saintess calmly replied that it had to be an object containing high divine power or strong magical energy. Usually, the remains of valuable magical beasts were used for such offerings. However, she added that not only were such materials rare, but it would also be extremely difficult for Emma's father to obtain one. Ian tightly gripped his hands and asked if a high-ranking magical beast would suffice. He mentioned that he had heard one was worth around 70 gold. The Saintess, however, regretfully informed him that it wouldn't be enough. If she had to estimate, she believed that an adult of that magical beast species might be sufficient. Ian nodded in understanding and thanked her for the explanation. He then excused himself, saying he had to leave. The Saintess agreed, but assured him that she believed Emma would experience a miracle soon. She encouraged him to continue watching over her with faith. As Ian walked away, he couldn't help but wonder if the monster mentioned in the letter would be strong enough to serve as an offering. But he also knew that he couldn't handle anything stronger than the beast he had just killed on his own. For now, he had only one option. He had to see his professor, Derek.